Angela Yee. Searching for the perfect gift this holiday season? Celebrate with Born in Roma perfumes by Valentino Beauty. Discover the Born in Roma scent collection at Sephora. Born in Roma by Valentino Beauty. For her, for him, for them.
The AI upscaling on the new Samsung Neo QLED and OLED TVs brings old content like from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond into the future. So no matter how far back your shows are from, they'll look groovy, baby. And colors and contrast pop in day or night with glare-free OLEDs. And the Neo QLED 8K processors are awesome sauce. They make every detail look sweet. It's time to bring your TV watching into the future. Welcome to a new era of Samsung AI TV. Discover more at Samsung.com. Upscale every moment. Upscaling utilizes AI-based algorithms. Viewing experience may vary according to types of content and format.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to an extended free preview of this month's episode of What a Cartoon Movie, all about Hotel Transylvania. I am one of your hosts, Bob Mackey, and monsters are racist against me. Who is here with me today, as always?
Henry Gilbert, and I hope you guys enjoy this as much as 6 Dave Matthews Band concerts.
Yes, at the end of this month, right before Halloween, we're getting it in down at the wire. We took our first tour of Hotel Transylvania, the first movie in the very long and very popular running series starring Adam Sandler, and we are very happy. This is unlike last month, when the movie made us very sad, but we had a lot of fun talking about it.
Yes, it is so awesome to do another of the spooky but fun movies. We had a lot of fun with Paranorman or the Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island one, and now we have one that had a very interesting history to dig into, which you'll hear a little bit about on this, but also both a very funny script and really fun animation that expresses so much, even though it is in a 3D style of 2012.
So on this preview, you're going to hear a little bit of our history of Hotel Transylvania, but if you want to hear the rest of the history and the rest of the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons and sign up at the $10 level. And when you do, you'll get access to nearly 6 entire years of What a Cartoon Movie. A ton of episodes. They're all between 3 and 6 hours long. We've covered, at this point, the entire 90s Disney Renaissance, so if there's one of those movies you want us to talk about, we already did. And we also covered all of the Toy Story movies, and we will cover any Toy Story movie they produce in the future. Also, weird movies like the Beavis and Butthead movies, the Rocko's Modern Life movie. We've covered anime. We have nearly 72 episodes of What a Cartoon Movie in the can, and that I guarantee you will last you a very long time if you are a new listener to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. And that $10 level also gets you all the $5 stuff. Henry, what's happening there?
There is so many cool things at that $5 level that you get when you sign up to hear the What a Cartoon Movie at the $10 level. Every month, first of all, you get to hear all the podcasts we release on free feeds, but without any ads on them. Then you also get new podcast each month of Talking Futurama and Talk King of the Hill. We dig super duper into an episode of both of those series. We are up to the Comedy Central years of Futurama, and we are just about to wrap up the 3rd season of King of the Hill. And we also have a huge back catalog there too. We have almost 200 exclusive miniseries podcasts there, us covering every episode of The Critic and every episode of Mission Hill and many of our favorite episodes of Batman the Animated Series. All of that is there and ad-free at the $5 level, and you get it too when you go to the $10 level for the What a Cartoon Movie at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons.
And if you've never signed up for Patreon before, it is so easy to do. And once you sign up, you can listen to all of our bonus podcasts alongside all of your favorite free podcasts as part of your podcasting lifestyle with any podcasting app, program, or device you might have. It's so easy, and it's all happening at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons.
So please check all those out. And without further ado, why don't we check in to the little bit of the history of Hotel Transylvania? The history of the 2012 Hotel Transylvania is very complicated. They worked on it for over 7 years. Some even say 10 years.
That when you told me that, it was so surprising because it feels like a straight down the line pitch, like yeah, Hotel for Monsters. Yes, it feels like so simple. And the story is not complicated, even though I like the fact that there's no villain and it comes from just internal conflict between the characters. It just feels like, oh, this must have been a sure thing from the beginning.
Yeah, and instead it took tons of work, many directors, many false starts and stops Then once it does get moving, it actually is a straight line of 18 months of production. So it's like restart. And then once they have all the pieces in place, they're like, get this shit done now. We got to get September 2012, get it out the door. But okay, this picks up several things we've covered before. So I have some quick recaps here. So this is our second Sony Pictures animation film we've done after Spider-Verse, which was a while back. So a quick update on that. So this goes back to the 90s. 1992, Sony Picture Imageworks is founded, based in both Vancouver, British Columbia, and Montreal, Quebec. They are two studios that are mainly doing early CGI animation for special effects in Columbia and TriStar Films at Sony. So, 1992, that's when Terminator 2 comes out. All of the film companies are like, we need our own VFX place. We need to buy computers that make special effects. And this was the one owned by Sony.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, they haven't made all solid gold. Sony Pictures has made the Emoji Movie, I believe. It's one of their releases. After watching this and having watched Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and the Spider-Verse films, I feel like I care more about what they're up to than Disney or Pixar at this point. They're exciting me a lot more.
Well, the slate of Pixar right now is only sequels, I think. So.
Yes, and I don't know what Disney's doing. I forget.
Yeah, no, it's hard to. Oh, well, Moana 2 is their next one, so there you go. But yeah, so their CGI work goes back as far as like Last Action Hero up to like Starship Troopers and Stuart Little. And Stuart Little, I think, is really where they started making inroads into like full animation, because like Roger Allers directed the second one. These were getting closer and closer to these aren't just special effects. These are animated movies. But Sony never really went all the way with animation in the 90s, despite the big animation boom that was going on. And then a big change happened finally by 2002. I read one account that said Sony was in between saying, do we even need to own our own CGI house? Shouldn't we? Let's sell this off and just use, secondary outlets for it. But then they see the success of Shrek and Monsters University in the same year, and they go like, no, how about instead Sony Picture Imageworks just makes full animated movies. We get into the business of this, and they launch Sony Pictures Animation as the American-based distributing arm of the Canada-based Imageworks, which that means unions get avoided.
I forgot they were up here. We covered Spider-Verse, I think by this point 5 years ago or something.
Right. Yeah, it came up again in the Across the Spider-Verse bad things about the poor working conditions here. A lot of it was Vancouver animators talking about how the terrible hours and the poor planning for a great movie, but ended up being very poorly produced by, again, a non-union, or at least they're not part of IATSE and they're not part of the Animation Guild. So they end up in crappy positions, I think. Surprisingly, the earliest news story of Variety I could find for Sony Pictures Animation was they said they were going to make an Astro Boy movie, which they never made.
Somebody made it. It's one of those secret movies that I'm always reminded of every 5 years. Like, oh shit, they made that. That was a real thing in 2009.
Yeah, I believe it was like a consortium of like Korean and Chinese production companies and others, but none of the major distributors. But there was, I do think the Tezuka estate was very protective of Astro Boy and probably would not have gone for the kind of changes that Sony Pictures Animation would have demanded on Astro Boy. They want him to shoot lasers or pellets out of his butt, and Sony is like, that's hard to sell a toy of, but Tezuka gets to keep it. So they're not able to make the Astro Boy movie, but in 2003 they announced a huge slate of films as they're finally starting to work on it. They are working on Open Season. They announced that. They announced Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and they announced Surf's Up. They also do announce a Brenda Chapman, Roger Allers adaptation of a Scottish folktale called Tam Lin, which never gets made. And also a film called The Chub Chubs, which is based on the first Imageworks short that also never happened.
Oscar-winning short, by the way.
Oh, right.
You guys, you got to watch The Chub Chubs. I think it's on YouTube, and it's so hilarious because they made a short, and the short won an Oscar, and it shouldn't have won an Oscar. You got to check this short out. And I think the second and final short they made was a Christmas short because they immediately were riding the Chub Chubs money train. Like, okay, next we got a Christmas special.
That had to be a rough year for the Chub Chubs to win it.
Yeah, I forget. Sorry, I forget what it was up against. But my wife and I watched it immediately upon learning about it winning the Oscar. We're like, "What the hell is this?" And no good.
That's the production of Vancouver, Bob. You can't hate it too much. It's.
I'm glad the Chub Chubs no longer exist.
So by 2006, they were able to finally put out their first film 4 years after coming together, which is pretty good for your, if you're starting up the animation engines, it takes a while to get the first one out, and Sony stuck with it. They didn't just cancel every release. So 2006, they put out Open Season. The next year, they get out Surf's Up, Open Season 2 the year after that, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs the year after that, and Open Season 3 the year after that. A new open season every year with new leads every other year too.
Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, that's something I was dismissive of because I loved the book as a kid, but the book was basically 20 pages of, wouldn't it be funny if like a sandwich was a boat and a meatball fell from the sky and the rivers were spaghetti sauce? There was no story in it. And then I learned about, Clone High, and then I watched it with Nina maybe a few years ago, and I was like, oh, it's what I see now in the Spider-Verse. It's them trying to take the flat 2D cubism UPA stuff and adapt it into 3D, and they're using some of the same Ren and Stimpy guys they use for Clone High.
Yeah, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is like the practice for Hotel Transylvania of they had this idea that just wasn't coming together with their internal team, and then they hired outside of the SPA system and got ringers in Lord and Miller, and they saved the production and made it funny and popular. With also, like Hotel Transylvania, what if we just hired Saturday Night Live performers to do some of the stuff?
And like with the Lego Movie, I've never seen the sequel, and I'm sure it's perfectly fine. Maybe one of these days. I don't. There's so many other things I need to watch that I've just they seem like a shrug to me.
Yeah, I haven't seen either of those sequels either. Yeah, but another funny thing to note with Sony Pictures Animation is not everything is done at ImageWorks, though a lot of it is, but they do license out other films as well, including they did release 2 Aardman films, including Arthur Christmas, the year before this came out.
Saw it last year, didn't care for it.
Though they did Pirates, and that was a good movie.
Yeah, I really like Pirates. We'll cover that one day. It's great, and didn't do very well, unfortunately.
Pro parrots and other birds, too. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's all about saving a bird, the entire movie.
And yes, while the Animation Guild website does say that the Sony Pictures Animation Studio is part of the Guild and IATSE, ImageWorks isn't. I found a 2009 article complaining about that, a 2012 article complaining about it, and it was part of the Across the Spider-Verse poor working conditions coverage as well, from Vulture, pointing out that, again, it's a non-union studio, so these poor hours and unpaid overtime is reflected in that.
I hope they're doing okay with that new Spider-Verse, because the last time I heard about it, it sounded like they had to scrap an entire movie.
Yeah, no, I bet they've scrapped a movie already, and like there's absolutely no way that third Spider-Verse film comes out before 2027. I'm going to say that for sure. Like, no way.
I think it's safe to say.
But hey, I also bet it will be pretty good when it comes out. And Across the Spider-Verse is the highest grossing global moneymaker for Sony Pictures Animation, period. It made $670 million worldwide. So with all that history there, how did Hotel Transylvania come into being at Sony Pictures Animation? Well, it goes all the way back to the idea of a comedy writer named Todd Durham, who you'll see he's the story by credit on this. And I'd call him a very lucky boy because he had very little to do with the actual production of this movie, past the original kernel of an idea. But Todd Durham is a comedian and comedy writer who honestly doesn't have much produced stuff to his name. One of his other most famous things is a little scene 1984 Star Wars parody called Hyperspace. Have you heard of this?
No, I just looked it up now because I was clicking through to see what else did he work on. It is a Star Wars parody starring Chris Elliott and Paula Poundstone. How have I not seen this?
I had never heard of it before either. Then when I went to the page for it, one of the strangest things about it is that in the United Kingdom in the 80s, the Darth Vader parody in it, Lord Buckethead, got taken up by a political comedian, and they ran Lord Buckethead like against Margaret Thatcher and other people for prime minister.
I'm worried this could be better than Spaceballs. I'm adding it to my Letterboxd watch list right now. I have to see. It's known as the Gremloids in some territories.
Yeah, that's what the British people would know it as too. Yes.
God damn.
So, but Todd Durham, after that success, he had a lot of ideas in Hollywood, and he put together a concept for a hotel for monsters, as explained in the opening thing. And I mean, when you break it down, it is very smart. Like, you have all of these public domain monsters that while Universal can be like, well, these are specifically the Universal monsters. Nobody owns Dracula. Nobody owns Frankenstein. Nobody owns the Mummy or Wolfman. They can all just live in a hotel together. And kids love monsters. No matter the generation, kids love these monsters.
They're so familiar with them, and when you're making a CGI movie, it means you only really have to focus on one location, mostly indoors.
That's all. Yes, that is very smart too. He pitched it from the beginning as like, this could be a series of films. This could be TV shows. This is toys. This is everything. He put together this pitch. He takes it to Columbia. I could not find the year mark for this, but it at least has to be 2005, if not even a little earlier. He takes it to Columbia, apparently cold, and Columbia is just like, yeah, we love this. Like, some executive loved this idea so much. Cut to 2011, when Genndy Tartakovsky comes on, he talks about how he had these things like, guys, can we fix it this way? Can we change this a little? And he's like, the executives fell in love with the Hotel Transylvania concept and were so attached to it, they didn't want much changed at all. They're like, no, it's a hotel for monsters. You don't change that.
We should tell people also, if you want to know more about Genndy, we covered Dexter's Lab. We covered the Dexter's Lab movie on this show. We covered Samurai Jack as well. I'm sure that's all the Genndy stuff we've covered so far.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm picking up the Genndy stuff at Samurai Jack when we get there. Yeah. But so a hotel for monsters concept is brought to Columbia. They love it. They buy it. They don't announce it for a little while. It's not in the 2003 announcement, but they are like, yeah, this is definitely going to be one of our earliest movies. We are working on this. Even though it was signed up for in 2005, at the very least, it took another 7 years before it finally came out. The earliest article I could find on its announcement is from June 2006, where it is announced as Hotel Transylvania. They plan for it to come out in 2009, and they are named their first directors for it, Anthony Stacci and David Feiss, who were the co-director and head of story on Open Season. And it sounded like they thought, well, yeah, we'll just take the Open Season team and move them over to Hotel Transylvania, and that'll be the next project.
You mean Cow and Chickens, David Feiss?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
It's okay. It's funny how they went from one 90s kids cartoon guy to another.
That's true. Two different Cartoon Network series creators. That is funny. So those two guys are the original directors. On top of that, there's Michelle Murdocha, who would be the producer and like the managing producer of the production from that point to the final days of the film. Like she's there for all of it. One of the few people who is. And the writer is going to be Don Reimer. He's working on the screenplay. And so they're like, oh yeah, that's going to work great. They say that in 2006. Clearly, it does not work great because less than 2 years later, in March 2008, they're like, you know what? This movie is not coming out next year, and we have scrapped almost everything, and we're starting over with a new director instead. So that director would be Jill Colton, who was the other co-director of Open Season, and who also worked on, was a top animator on Pixar films in the 90s. Then she worked on the Curious George movie at ILM before moving over to Sony Pictures. So like, okay, Jill Colton, she's going to save this thing. Here's what they gave the log line for in 2008. The story centers on Simon Van Helsing, the youngest of a long line of monster hunters. The last thing Van Helsing wants to do is fall in love with Dracula's daughter Mavis. Upon discovering that they are natural enemies, the doomed couple attempts to bring peace between monsters and humans.
So kind of similar, although it's they swap in Helsing for a stonery backpacker guy.
Yes, yeah, and it definitely seems like it's much more Mavis and less Dracula. Dracula's the main character of this movie. And yeah, they dump all this Van Helsing thing from it too. Maybe they saw how badly the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing film did, and they're like, no, let's not touch Van Helsing.
That was him. I forgot that was him. And then they said, well, you can only be Wolverine. Stop kidding yourself. You got 20 more years of Wolverine in you at least.
He thought he could be somebody other than Wolverine. I saw in one of the many, many Deadpool and Wolverine interviews to promote the film, somebody showed Hugh Jackman a picture of when he was like at the premiere of Van Helsing, and he has such flowing, luxurious long hair that he got for Van Helsing. And he's like, boy, that looks pretty silly now, he had to admit. So, all right, Jill Colton, she's going to fix this movie. It'll be out by 2010. Everything's going to be fine. But things are not fine. I can't find too much about her version of the movie beyond that log line. But a big thing changes in around mid 2008 and into late 2009. Like there's changes in the heads of development at Sony Pictures Animation. There's new executives at Sony as well. Things are going very different there. By the end of 2009, I believe that's when Colton is lost on the project. And so started 2010. They know who they're going to use. It's the co-directors Todd Wilderman and Chris Jenkins, who just worked on Open Season 2. They're going to make this thing work. Chris Jenkins is a Disney vet who came up with the idea for Surf's Up. He was the head of story on Open Season 2 and was the VFX director on A Hunchback of Notre Dame for Disney. So yeah, Jenkins and Wilderman, they're working on this. This one, you can find some stuff out there. Wilderman especially has posted on his own blog, like, here's my character designs for Dracula and Mavis and Frankenstein, which looks about 50% of the way to how they look in this movie. An important thing to note is when they're working on this, and in the other versions too, they're like, they are making character models, they are making backgrounds, and they are building the hotel basically. So that's why when the final director comes on, they are told, well, but we already built these things. You can't change Dracula too much, buddy, because we don't have time. So that's why the squashing and stretching comes into play, I think, more than they needed it. They maybe would have first imagined, because they are married to a lot of these character models.
Yeah, it's funny. With CGI, you're literally building things in a virtual environment. It's not like you're painting a background. So just like, no, we built the hotel. Now you have to live in it.
Yes, you can only change it so much once they hire on the final team. But so they're developing all these models, all of these stylistic choices, art direction. These things are happening, and you may notice I haven't named any of the final writers or stars of this movie yet either. I couldn't find any listed stars of this movie up until 2011, so I don't know who were the celebs they were trying to use before that, or if Sandler was considered and they just never announced it.
It feels like a perfect match.
You would think,
though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're working on this into 2010, but it's just not coming together. They are not liking how it's feeling, though. Around this time, this is where the log line that sounds a little more like the final film comes out, which is the movie centers around a group of monsters, including Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, and the Werewolf, who are hiding out in a hotel on the outskirts of Transylvania now that modern technology has made them seemingly irrelevant. Which this movie, it is sort of about the modern world in them by the end.
Yeah, it's a fun reveal at the end that you can see how people, they're unaware of how people regard them. And it's a fun surprise. When they got there, I was like, oh, this is cool. I wasn't expecting this. I thought I was going to be all locked into the hotel. So I'm glad it wasn't an element that you see throughout the reality of what people think.
I love the Comic-Con they end up with at the end. Mm-hmm. That's some of my biggest laughs. Blah, blah, blah. So they're working on this on and off, and the budget is nearing at least $100 million at this point, which when we covered Despicable Me on other stuff, that is the difference. Like Despicable Me, Illumination tries to keep it sub $100 million. Like Sony, meanwhile, is just ballooning and ballooning and ballooning thanks to having to make this film multiple times. So right before Adam Sandler comes on, there is one actual credited writer on this. The Hageman Bros are credited for the story by, which I think they like early on worked with the Todd Durham guy to flesh out the world, but they have very little to do with this final script. Nobody who worked on the final film ever mentions the Hagerman brothers, though they certainly mention it in their stuff. But They're doing fine, those two brothers. They worked on the Ninjago, many Ninjago's projects, and currently Star Trek Prodigy.
I'm sure a friend of the show, Glenn Lakin, knows them very well.
Oh, yeah. I should ask him, like, hey, what these guys ever talk about Hotel Transylvania? But then a big hire they got on this, who is credited alongside Robert Smigel, is British comedy writer Peter Bainham. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I should specify a Welsh comedy writer. And he actually is, I have a lot of respect for him when I looked at his work, because he came up with the Armando Iannucci. He worked on some of the earliest Alan Partridge projects, including my favorite Alan Partridge thing, the I'm Alan Partridge series.
That whole thing is a black hole to me. I have no idea what it is. I know a lot of people I enjoy it, but I'm only vaguely aware, like, oh, he's a fake talk show, and it feels like you have to learn a lot to really get into it. Sort of like what Tim Heidecker does now.
Oh, yes. There is a ton. Actually, has a perfect analogy, because, yes, Alan Partridge has literally decades of lore that is a real. I listened to the Alan Partridge autobiography book, audiobook he did, and it really does follow, like, yes, if you watched all of the TV show, he treats that as this happened on this episode, and I am now reflecting on it in my biography.
I do respect that, but it seems like a pretty tall mountain to climb at this point in my life.
It's a lot, but I do think you could start with the series I'm Alan Partridge that Bainham worked on, and you could just enjoy that on its own. Like, it is a proper British sitcom that takes place after his talk show. The talk show is a fun parody of talk shows too, but in my opinion, I do think I'm Alan Partridge is the most approachable. Though British comedy geeks in the comments, let me know if you feel different.
So he is a very esteemed comedy writer.
Yeah, he worked on a ton of the Iannucci projects, he's a beloved comedy writer on his own right. And he also has done a lot of Borat work and Bruno work. And he wrote on the Brothers Grimsby. Like, this Bainham guy, working on kid stuff is not normal for him, though. Aardman is how he got into it. Basically, he does writing on Arthur Christmas, and I think that brought him in the Sony house, and Sony's like, well, as long as you're working on Arthur Christmas, could you give a pass on Hotel Transylvania?
Arthur Christmas, I brought it up earlier. I'm sure I said this before, but it does feel like Aardman saying, okay, what do Americans want in a CGI movie? Make it ugly, check. Make it about a dad, check. It feels like they were just saying, what do you pigs want? And then that didn't do very well, so they went back to stop motion.
Maybe they're also like, okay, what's something Americans and British people love? Christmas. We can do Christmas things. You like that, right? So that brought in this Welsh writer, and I did see Smigel credit his script as the main one that Smigel did the big rewrite on. So the bones of Hotel Transylvania, I think, are in the Bainham one, and he'd go on to do some other animated projects too. Though mostly his credits have in the last decade have been on Sacha Baron Cohen productions.
Early holiday deals are here, and so are amazing deals at Amazon. You'll save so much on early holiday fashion gifts, like cozy fits and stylish shirts. You'll have money left over for the matching sweaters everyone definitely wants to wear for the holiday card.
Cheese.
Or that ugly holiday sweater that's, like, really ugly.
OMG, that's, like, really ugly.
Oh, what fun it is to save. Shop early holiday deals now.
Just a few years ago, only 3% of domestic violence shelters accepted pets, meaning many abuse survivors had to choose between staying in a difficult situation for their pet or leaving their pet behind. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, and nearly half of survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Purina believes in the healing power of pets, particularly for survivors of abuse. They believe pets and people are better together, which is one of the many reasons they started the Purple Leash Project. Through the Purple Leash Project, Purina is helping break down one of the many barriers abuse survivors face: the lack of pet-friendly domestic violence shelters. Purina has helped increase the amount of pet-friendly shelters across the country from 3% to nearly 20% through the Purple Leash Project. With more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters, survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to get involved.
Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. Now is the time to make a plan. Whether you plan to vote absentee by mail, in person at your county auditor's office before Election Day, or at your polling place on November 5th, it's important you take steps now to make your plan at voterready.iowa.gov. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. Find more info at voterready.iowa.gov. This message is presented by the Iowa Secretary of State.
So, okay, we got Bainham working on the script, but they still don't have really the final cast or directors in place. This big change, I believe, happens in late 2010 because there is a new boss at Sony Pictures Animation, Michelle Ramo-Coyote. She was straight out of DreamWorks Animation, Miramax Film, and Paramount, and I think she was very much into hire outside and get some big names on this. Like, that is the DreamWorks approach. Not that Sony Pictures Animation before that weren't also already casting stars for it, but this feels more like the DreamWorks approach of build this around a star.
Yeah, and it really felt like, I haven't looked at their other works, but really headhunting people on the animation side that some normies would have heard about.
Yes, yeah, I do think it was a project of Coyote that she wanted to get a big name, esteemed director instead of just using people who had done at least one open season. No more open season people. But all right, where does Adam Sandler figure into this? Well, because we're going to cover it more next month in our movie, I'm just going to pick this up in the mid-aughts. Adam Sandler is the king of comedy at this point. Though we as comedy snobs looked down on Adam Sandler quite a bit for good reason, because he was making a lot of shit in the aughts.
You know, and this is somebody who loved him on SNL. I even liked him when he was briefly on The Cosby Show. The furthest I went with him in his movie career was Billy Madison. I did not like Happy Gilmore. I had a friend who loved it. It broke his heart that I didn't. I liked his comedy CDs up to a point, but as of like 96, I am checked out of the Adam Sandler cinema world.
You know, Happy Gilmore, I did enjoy. I think that I had a good time with that. After Happy Gilmore, I think I watched Big Daddy and I was like, no, I'm starting to see the holes in this. And then Little Nicky, ooh boy. And but the aughts are such a bad time for Adam Sandler as I list some things here. Also the aughts, Happy Madison Productions, which is his monster, huge production company for all of not just his movies, but all of his friends' movies. Happy Madison was doing a lot with Sony at that time via mostly Columbia and TriStar. The earliest Sony production they did was 2001's Joe Dirt, the David Spade vehicle.
Later seen on Crackle with Joe Dirt 2, which involves time travel.
That's right. That's hey, it's keeping it in the Sony family. It was a Crackle original back when that was Sony's big. That was their attempt at a Tubi. Maybe Crackle was ahead of its time because now all I read are about how freemium TV like Crackle on Tubi is everybody loves it.
This is cutting to something I'm working on right now, but in doing research on Dead Rising, I was reminded that there are 2 Crackle Dead Rising films.
Wow.
Yes.
I forgot that. Wait, isn't Rob Riggle in that?
Rob Riggle plays Frank West.
Holy shit. Wow.
In pitch perfect casting. Unfortunately, he's not the main character.
Oh, that's because they couldn't afford that much of Rob Riggle's time, I bet you. That's Rob Riggle, by the way. He's in this movie. He's the skeleton man.
Oh, okay. I was wondering who that was.
But yeah, so there's Joe Dirt, and boy, it's a great list of stuff that Sony Pictures was putting out with them. They were right up in the years leading up to this film. They're putting out Grown Ups. They're putting out The Zookeeper. They're putting out Paul Blart. They're putting out Jack and Jill.
Oof. A rancid time for comedy. The only thing I remember about these films are just the relentless mockery of them, especially by outlets like Red Letter Media.
Doesn't it feel like such a different time today than then? Like back then, it's like George Lucas ruined this stuff and Adam Sandler is the cancer of comedy. And now these days, I don't think Red Letter Media or the many imitators out there love Adam Sandler, but it does feel like since no movies get to be comedies in theaters anymore, I do think we've all, and I include myself in this too, have lightened up on Adam Sandler because it's like, well, at least he put a comedy in theaters.
Yeah, I think we miss even having bad comedies around. And they still make bad comedies, they're just all streaming now and no one bothers investigating them. But yeah, and I think he did a comedy special recently that it was sort of like he was being critical of himself, which I guess that kind of bad movie Funny People did the same thing, but it showed that I can make fun of myself but then still do all the same things.
Yeah, I think after he didn't get even nominated for Uncut Gems, he jokingly, but he did mean it too, say that like, all right, enough of this shit, like enough of trying to please critics, like I'm going back to the things that make me money. This is something with Adam Sandler, especially with his friends and longtime friends like Judd Apatow and Robert Smigel. Those guys are some of the best comedy writers of their generation. They're great comedy writers and very successful, but they know Adam Sandler can do better, and they constantly are trying to shove him like, please, Adam, I know you can do better than this, and he's like, I don't want to.
Yeah, it's funny when some of our heroes, comedy heroes like Smigel and Odenkirk, they're all from Sandler's generation. Yeah. And Odenkirk doesn't really work with Sandler anymore. He hasn't for a very long time, but Smigel is still his guy. And I feel like Smigel wants to push him beyond doing the funny voice and doing the very shticky stuff.
I think Smigel is still very trusted by Sandler, and he can get Sandler to do some of his best work, including in this movie, and that Sandler trusts him instead of Sandler going like, nah, no, I know better. I think he actually listens to Smigel a little bit more than most. So yes, Happy Madison is making bank for Sony with all of these like garbage films that are very successful. And
sorry to interrupt, but I remember when the Sony email leaks happened, wasn't there a lot of discourse around these movies are garbage?
Oh, yes. Well, okay, Bob, I'll cut to that now.
Oh,
yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I didn't realize this was going to be part of the history.
Well, I thought of this a little bit because I was like, did Hotel Transylvania come up in those email hacks? I don't remember everything, but yes, the feeling was that Sandler was not paying off the way he used to by the time those email hacks came out in 2014. And they're like, oh, well, these things aren't making the money they used to make. One of the big things of contention in the released emails, Sandler was trying to convince them to spend $200 million on a Candyland film.
Huh. This is before Wreck-It Ralph, when they were like, God damn it.
Well, and this is when they're working on Pixels, and they're like, this is not coming together, or this is not, this doesn't feel right. The only Hotel Transylvania stuff that came up in it was that the Sony Pictures Animation boss, Koyate, who I mentioned before, she is complaining that Alan Covert, who he worked, his main producer on a lot of his films, and Grandma's Boy, Covert is trying to get another $100,000 out of a producing credit on Hotel Transylvania 2, and they're like, this guy's not earning his keep. We don't have to give him another $100K. But Sandler's like, come on. This led to Amy Pascal responding to her with 100%. They are such assholes.
That's great. I mean, we shouldn't be privy to this, but God bless it, we are.
Though I do feel like, well, Happy Madison are assholes, but if they are being regarded as assholes by shitty like film executives, is like, well, film executives are awful people too. It's hard to pick.
Yeah.
Why must I pick a side in this?
Even if Adam Sandler is bankrolling a vacation for his friends, at least a movie comes out of that.
Yeah, and they are at least trying to make a film as opposed to like film executives who just give themselves a bonus for doing jack shit. Though Sandler laughed all the way to the bank with this because though he would work on future Hotel Transylvania movies after it, he moves over to Netflix as his primary production place, getting paid even more money, and seemingly Netflix loves working with the Sandman. They keep putting out his movies.
Yeah, even an animated feature.
And as far as Netflix says, Sandler's movies are gigantic. 80 billion people watch every single one of them.
Yeah, it's one of those stats where they say 86 billion minutes for watch, and you have no way of understanding what that means.
So by the end of 2010, I believe, is when Sandler is approached to do it. And while this is not a Happy Madison production, basically all of his producers get brought into it and get executive producer credit, including especially Sandler's longtime super duper friend and Grandma's Boy himself, Alan Covert, who I don't really know how much he really contributes. I feel like he's a trusted friend of Sandler, but how much does he really produce? That I have questions.
Yeah, I don't know this guy. I just know that he was kind of shoved into a movie that I thought was for the G4 crowd. Take that, everybody.
Alan Covert, he has been a friend of Sandler's for the longest time. If you see Happy Gilmore, he is the unhoused caddy that he adopts, and a lot of the jokes with Covert are about humiliating him, like they're at least in the 90s films, I remember.
It's sort of like that little guy that Matt and Trey kept around to humiliate in movies.
Right. But hey, if you get bullied by Adam Sandler all your life, but you become worth at least $100 million, I don't know. Is it worth it?
I'll take it.
Plus, again, you get to make Grandma's Boy, a film no one would make if you weren't friends with Adam Sandler. Make in and star in Grandma's Boy. So yeah, Alan Covert is an main executive producer on this movie. Adam Sandler gets brought in as well, and Adam Sandler makes sure a lot of his friends are hired. I'll get to that in the cast. But he brings in Robert Smigel, and Robert Smigel loves animation. We talked a ton about this, but he rewrites the Bayman script and brings in a ton of stuff. I mean, I definitely think there are so many jokes in this that I'm like, well, that's a Smigel. That's Smigel. That's Smigel. And not just because you hear him do a voice in it, too.
Mm-hmm. And not just because you're hearing a lot of, again, the jokes coming out of the Triumph voice.
Yes.
Someone else doing the Triumph voice.
I also do think it's not a coincidence that this is when Smigel and Sandler's kids were now old enough to watch their movies, as opposed to when they made 8 Crazy Nights, their kids had just been born, you know.
And now they get to be in them.
Yeah, though Smigel also, too, you know, there's some very touching videos I just was reminded of that. I think he has a son who deals with a autism spectrum that takes a lot of assistance. So I think he brings that a lot to his work too. It's made him a lot more empathetic for, I think, a lot of parents of disabled kids as well. I say that because I do think Smigel does bring a lot of like overprotectiveness in this character here. I do wonder if that's a little bit of Smigel with regards to his own son and raising his son too.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I feel like everyone mellows out over time, but his writing did get a lot less mean-spirited over time. I did enjoy the mean-spirited part of it, though, back in the day.
Though Smigel still, there's a meanness to him. He likes being mean too. It's we just had Mark Malkoff on and on Talking Simpsons for the Carson episode. People have got to listen to his 2-part Smigel interview he posted in the last few months. Like, there's so much specific nerdery in there about his SNL work. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. It's great to learn just what he was a part of. I only know maybe a few sketches he wrote because those aren't ever credited. You have to find out via interviews, and Mark knows it all.
It's so great. Yeah, and Smigel has such a prolific career. I could barely find interviews of him talking about Hotel Transylvania. I found a little, and Sandler told funny stories of like, basically when he hired Smigel onto this, Smigel like moved into a hotel room for a few weeks to help write it. And he tells this funny story of like, oh yeah, Smigel always writes in his like underwear and socks hanging off his feet. And he's like, hey, I wrote a song for you. Here it is. And I also do think that maybe, speaking of backgrounds being brought into it, I could not find a source on this, but like Smigel and Sandler and Gendy Tartakovsky are all, their parents are, or grandparents were Russian Jewish immigrants who were, you know, running from anti-Semitism in Russia, especially, and immigrated for that reason. And I think this story of the monsters who are scared of humanity and are like, can I trust them? Can my children be safe? And that they, you know, build up these walls around themselves. I do wonder if they're bringing a little of their personal background into it for good comedic purposes.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before the recording, but there's a lot of being Jewish, growing up Jewish in Sandler's writing and comedy, and I can see that being the subtext here, even if they're not aware of it.
Yeah, and that they're like, oh, there's all these hateful stereotypes that we have to play against. Like, we don't say that. We don't do this, you know.
They could have easily had this party be her bat mitzvah, which is a perfect pun, but I think they're like, that's putting too much of a lampshade on it.
That's one pun too many. And yes, like you said, Sandler does bring the Triumph voice into us, though he also does say he brought in a little bit of his Zohan voice, which...
I like this. I think Adam Sandler's a funny voice actor, and I enjoy the work of Steve Carell a lot more. But I feel like Adam Sandler's blowing his Gru out of the water with a similar character, let's say.
Yeah, actually, in stature too, and with their lanky legs, like they're actually, and they both have their own secret. I guess the zombies are even minions, aren't they?
Yeah, basically.
Though Dracula has magic and Gru has science. That's the big divider between them. The zombies not as marketable as minions though. So all right, we're at 2011. They've hired Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler brings in all of his friends. They get the script going, but they decide they want a new director. All right, this is where Genndy Tartakovsky comes in. So I'm going to pick up after Samurai Jack, which we covered a very long time ago, but Bob did a great history on.
2018, perhaps?
Yeah, like very early What a Cartoon. But so Samurai Jack, it gets a ton of accolades. It actually does seem to break in just a little bit outside of the cartoons are for kids box. I feel like some people in Hollywood actually watched it and got appreciation for what he was pulling off on that show.
Yeah, from what I recall, not really popular with viewers, but it was getting by on prestige alone for a long time.
It was winning him a lot of awards, like it was a big step forward, but as you reviewed many years ago, Bob, and still stand by, like it was kind of stuck in like, well, there's no Adult Swim. It's not really Adult Swim, and it's also too big budget for Adult Swim, but it also is too grown up for the regular Cartoon Network.
Yeah, it airs around the exact same time that Adult Swim launches, and if they were smart, they would have just said, oh, make it for adults, make it for late night. But they were not sure if the late night gambit was going to pay off, so all the programming was reruns and very cheap things they made in Atlanta.
I think Samurai Jack and the Justice League shows got to live in that like hammock of like 6 to 8 o'clock time of like the bridge to Adult Swim eventually. But so not only is Samurai Jack doing well, but Genndy is trying to then parlay that into getting to work in theatrical animation, which again, this is him trying at least in 2002, trying to get it to happen. It would take 10 years for him to finally do his first theatrical animation directing job. So I think one of his earliest inroads is he works on, for 3 years of releases, the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoons that basically bridge Attack of the Clones to Revenge of the Sith. And it was some of the most beloved fan servicey Star Wars stuff you got in the dark times of the prequels.
Yeah, I know people enjoy those. The prequels alienated me from any Star Wars interest I had that I didn't really tune in, but they seem good. But I really like his comedy more, and I know he does action well, and I think it might be what he prefers to do. But God, seeing comedy from him again was so great.
And Genndy is working on so many like starts and stops projects. He's working on tons of stuff at Cartoon Network, pilots, and also helping a ton on things. Like he is, I believe, the animation director on Korgoth the Barbaria, or he had a big role in it.
Oh God, that pilot's great. We covered that, by the way, on What a Cartoon.
He's working on so many things, but he is also he is pitching movies, and that nobody's really biting on at this time as 2D is dying. He wants to work in 2D. Also in 2010, he was sure he had sold a live action Samurai Jack movie that he was going to get to direct because it was going to be produced with J.J. Abrams, and J.J. Abrams would never disappoint people or not release something.
He should be in movie jail. So many crimes.
It's insane. It's insane. Yes. Genndy would later say that it was because JJ got too swept up in Star Trek that he couldn't make the Samurai Jack movie. But yeah, it's just, it gets stuck in development hell. Also, I think Genndy was pitching himself to direct a Marvel movie or to work more on MCU stuff because he boarded the final battle at the end of Iron Man 2. And I would bet he was going like, can I work on, like, I can direct a live action movie, but that was his only Marvel work as far as I could see.
You might get to it, but do you know what I found out what he's up to lately, and it is interesting.
Oh, well, I mean, the Fixed movie, actually, that's sort of recent, but I think there's a more recent thing, right?
Okay, the Fixed one was what I'm talking about, and that's a movie that's written by him and John Vitti.
Right.
And it feels like it's in limbo because it's one of those things that it was a thing that Warner Brothers invested in, and then, there's a lot of problems there. So this movie could be finished right now. There could be another Genndy movie just done and nobody there to distribute it. And we were talking about this on some other podcasts. There is a new Looney Tunes movie that America, Canada, the good countries, I'm kidding. Other countries are getting it and we're not getting it because it's like they can't find distributors or they're not that interested.
Well, because Warner's like, we're not putting it in a theater. Like,
No.
So that is what happened with Fixed, that he wanted to make an R-rated film and was able to get Sony Pictures Animation to give some money for it, but Sony didn't want to release an R-rated animated film, so he sells it to New Line. But then the years go on, and then New Line, that is Warner under Zaslav, they're like, R-rated film about dogs that's animated? Nah, we're not releasing that. So Gendy is trying to get new distribution for it, I believe, at this point. Well, and then there's another part of his tragic aughts that he would later say a very dark time for himself, which was in 2009, they announced his big project at Cartoon Network, which he co-creates with Paul Rudish and Brian Andrews, Symbionic Titan.
Right. That's another one of his projects. And I know, pretty sure Drew Mackey, friend of the show, is a big fan of that program.
Yeah, he had told us that if we ever do the What a Cartoon on it, we should have him on. So I still haven't really watched it, also because it's not easy to watch for reasons I'll explain here. Basically, it's Robotech and Voltron meets a John Hughes movie is what they were going for. It definitely seems like it was greenlit when Cartoon Network was saying, we want an Avatar. Can you make us an anime type show? So Gendy loves anime. Like he wants to make an anime style show. And so they make Symbionic Titan and they get a whole season order. And he thinks, all right, this is going to go great. Debuts in 2010 to good, but not great ratings. And then it's canceled by the end of the year. And Gendy would later say it's simply because Cartoon Network could not make a toy deal in its first year. And they're like, no, get rid of it.
It shows the failure of the animation industry, perhaps of just executive brains, that they often can't find a use for people like him, and that he can make a movie and nobody wants to do anything with it.
I also think that Gendy has opinionitis, like he knows what he wants and he will argue with executives to get something done, and executives don't like that. But yeah, Symbionic Titan gets canceled. He also does take things public, as he did with Symbionic Titan. Like he let people know beforehand, yeah, this is getting canceled, guys. I thought I'd be working on a second season at the end of 2010. Guess I'm not. And he is so pissed he quits Cartoon Network. Like he's like, I'm out of here. I found the foreword he wrote to the Steven Universe art book, which he's like, oh yeah, I'm out of here. Like this is a really shitty time for me at Cartoon Network. He could have helped on more Cartoon Network projects, but he's like, I'm done with this. I'm out of here. Which frees him up for Sony Pictures Animation to approach him. He said for months that they were approaching him and he just didn't want to do it. He wanted to do an original idea and sell that as a movie. But he really wanted to do Samurai Jack. But if not that, an original idea of his.
Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. Now is the time to make a plan. Whether you plan to vote absentee by mail, in person at your county auditor's office before Election Day, or at your polling place on November 5th, it's important you take steps now to make your plan at voterready.iowa.gov. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. Find more info at voterready.iowa.gov. This message is presented by the Iowa Secretary of State.